Hi, thank you for joining me at Bert's Books, where today I'm going to be looking at one of the more obscure titles in the youth cult subgenre that is the biker novel. We're going to be looking at the curious case of one of the most difficult to obtain of these books, Fop On Wheels, which was probably the last throw of the dice for pulp author Peter Cave, at least as far as he could go in that particular genre in which he'd really made his name at this point. The early 70s had proved a fertile time for Cave, whose entree into the world of youth cult fiction, the Hell's Angel novel Chopper, had established him as a credible author within that particular niche. While sidelining under the pen name Petra Christian for a series of sexploitation novels, Cave continued to plough the biker furrow, achieving further success with titles such as The Run, Mama and Rogue Angels. By 1974, however, dwindling sales figures for biker novels prompted a reputedly rather tense meeting between Cave, his literary agent, according to rumour a young Jane Pluff, and his publishers, the New English Library, who'd already had internal discussions about a way forward for the biker lit novel, and surmised from the abysmal sales figures achieved by that year's rather patchy, greasy sons of bitches, they decided that the format needed a radical shake-up. The gruff machismo of the traditional biker novel was now to be considered passé. Developments in men's grooming since the end of the 60s had redefined the baseline to the degree that accessorised flourishes that would previously have been considered a bit Quentin Crisp were now fully embraced by mainstream culture. This is best illustrated by the development of Dick Emery's pantomime queenish character Clarence, who'd had to have his wardrobe drastically updated at one point in the 70s when the show's producers realised that standard men's fashions had long since outcamped Clarence's usual garb. Consequently, by the middle of the decade, Dick Emery's Clarence was togged up like a B-flick pimp. With this in mind, biker novel anti-heroes would need to assimilate a certain level of flamboyance. New English Library had high hopes for Cave's next work, Flamboyant Angels, a novel loosely inspired by Larry G. Brown's B-flick The Pink Angels. The book's pre-sales orders were hardly overwhelming, but they did strike the sales reps as vaguely encouraging and were regarded as a cause for cautious optimism. With that in mind, this book's follow-up was hastily put into motion. Fop On Wheels centred around Ken, a lone wolf motorcycle outlaw who cruised the highways with a certain sense of elan. A far cry from the greasy bro of the earlier biker novels, Ken took painstaking care over his appearance. He was fastidious in his personal grooming, and he paid great attention to his own sartorial coordination and accessorising. This naturally put him at odds with the rank and file of Neanderthal biker clubs up and down the country, but rather than indulge in common fisticuffs or the kind of bloody assault with implements such as bike chains or studded gauntlets, Ken, a black belt in the Oscar Wilde School of Self-Defence, is adept at demolishing his adversaries with sharply delivered verbal put-downs. There wasn't a highway outlaw in the country that couldn't be reduced to a heap of snivelling jelly by one of Ken's acidic broadsides of Wildean repartee. Stitch that, Chopper. Predictably, these novels' core audience reacted with hostility. The notorious Chipping Sodbury branch of the Hells Angels, on learning that the Bristol branch of John Menzies had set up a display bin for fresh off the press copies of Flamboyant Angels, famously rode en masse to the store, demolishing the aforementioned marketing display and terrorising local shoppers. There's a little bit of footage that was caught by a newsreel team at the time. Most of these innocent bystanders had absolutely no interest in the book whatsoever and had only dropped into the shop to pick up a slush puppy. The bad press this attracted, coupled with the dismal sales figures that Flamboyant Angels achieved, prompted New English Library into a swift about turn on Fop On Wheels, whose cover model, incidentally, spooked by the threats that his agency had received from bike clubs and trash fiction enthusiasts across the land, relocated to the Greater Manchester area, although some insist he actually found his way to Granada under an assumed new identity. It's unclear whether Fop On Wheels ever got as far as an initial print run, other than a very small batch of unpriced, uncorrected proof copies which were intended for review and for serialisation purposes. purposes. Given the bad press that this book now guaranteed, few, if any, of these copies were ever sent out. While trash fiction obsessives have scanned the auction sites for decades in hope of one of these ever turning up, I'm unaware that anyone has ever successfully pinned one down. There's a persistent rumour that the publisher's last remaining file copy, reputedly the source of the cover graphic here, was donated to the Trash Fiction Black Museum, where it's said to be more closely guarded from public view than that copy of the Necronomicon that resides in the library at the Vatican. So in short, there's not much hope of a YouTube talking book edition of it materialising anytime soon. Anyway, thank you again for joining me on another of these sporadic Trashlit oddity episodes that will come around every springtime really. Join me again next time for something that you've probably got more of a fighting chance of ever seeing a copy of. Ride free and stay flamboyant, my fellow outlaws.